There are more than 1 billion cows alive on this planet right now, and humanity eats them without a second thought. Pigs, chickens, goats, sheep, even horses and insects in some regions. Humans are by any measure the most flexible eaters on the planet. Now try to remember the last time you saw elephant meat on a menu anywhere. You almost certainly can't, and here's the strange part. The elephant represents the single largest concentration of meat walking on land, thousands of pounds of protein from just one animal, enough to feed an entire village for weeks. So why did humans hunt, farm, and eat nearly every other large animal within reach, while consistently leaving the biggest one essentially untouched? A cow and an elephant are both, biologically speaking, just meat, muscle, fat, tissue. So why does one appear on dinner tables across the entire world while the other almost never does? The answer isn't a single reason. It's math, biology, and something deeper humans figured out thousands of years ago, and once you see the full picture, it becomes impossible to unsee. Start with the math, because the math alone nearly settles the argument by itself. An adult elephant eats up to 300 pounds of food every single day: grass, bark, leaves, and tire branches, consumed across roughly 18 hours of nearly constant feeding, alongside up to 50 gallons of water. Compare that to cow, which reaches slaughter weight in about a year on a fraction of that resource investment, cheap, fast, and predictable. An elephant's pregnancy alone lasts around 22 months, the longest gestation period of any land animal on Earth. After that, the calf needs another 10 to 15 years of growth before reaching full size. That's a decade or more of pouring food and water into a single animal before it ever produces one meal. No farmer throughout history could realistically make that math work. You go broke or simply starve long before that investment ever paid off. A cow feeds you within a year. An elephant asks you to wait 10 years first. The choice essentially makes itself. But cost isn't even the biggest obstacle here. There's something else about elephants that has nothing to do with economics and everything to do with the animal itself. They're remarkably intelligent. Elephants recognize themselves in mirrors, a capability almost no other animal on Earth shares. They appear to mourn their dead, standing over the remains of family members, gently touching bones with their trunks, sometimes for hours, occasionally returning to the same location years later. They seem to comfort one another and remember specific faces and places across decades. At some point, this stops being purely about food and becomes something felt on a much deeper, instinctive level. Eating an animal that simply grazes and moves on is one thing. Eating an animal that appears to grieve is something else entirely, and humans seem to have recognized that distinction a very long time ago. Suppose you managed to overlook all of that anyway. You'd immediately run into a far more physical problem, one that could genuinely get you killed. An angry elephant ranks among the most dangerous animals alive. When threatened, they're neither slow nor gentle, capable of charging at speeds around 25 miles per hour while weighing as much as a small truck, easily capable of flipping a vehicle or crushing a person within seconds. Even today, elephants are responsible for hundreds of human deaths every year. Now imagine attempting that hunt armed with nothing but a spear or a bow, which is exactly the reality for most of human history. Pursuing an elephant meant risking your own life and quite possibly losing several of your strongest hunters in the process, for a payoff that wasn't guaranteed. Compared to that brutal trade-off, a deer or wild pig suddenly looks far more appealing, easier to catch, safer to kill, and considerably less likely to fight back like an armored tank. Early humans weren't behaving nobly by avoiding elephants. They were simply being practical, choosing accessible meals over gambling everything against something the size of a monster. Here's where the pattern gets genuinely interesting though, because it isn't an absolute rule, and the exceptions actually reinforce it rather than undermine it. Humans have at times eaten elephants. Certain communities across parts of Africa have hunted them for meat, and ancient humans clearly hunted their close relatives, woolly mammoths, sometimes to sustain entire groups. But notice the underlying pattern in every case. It almost always happened out of genuine necessity, not casual preference, never established as a regular staple or a farmed habit, always treated as a last resort rather than a first choice. That's not really a counterexample at all. It's the rule confirming itself from a different angle. Eventually, culture caught up with all of this and made the pattern essentially official. Elephants didn't just avoid the dinner table, they climbed to something higher entirely. Across parts of Asia, elephants became sacred, tied directly to gods, temples, and royalty, with an entire widely worshipped deity depicted with an elephant's head. Kings rode them into battle as living symbols of power, wisdom, and memory. Even in cultures without that same religious reverence, the elephant still came to represent something significant, famously known as the animal that never forgets. And you generally don't eat the animal you've elevated to godhood. You don't butcher the creature carved into your temple walls. You don't serve a living symbol of wisdom as a meal. Remarkably, cultures scattered across entirely different continents, speaking different languages, worshipping different gods with zero contact between them, independently arrived at the exact same quiet conclusion. Some animals are simply food, others become something more. So the real explanation was never just one single factor. It's every one of these reasons stacked directly on top of each other, all pointing the same direction. Elephants cost far too much to raise, demanding a decade of resources for one uncertain payoff. They're remarkably intelligent, capable of grief memory and something resembling genuine emotion, and something in human instinct resists treating that as ordinary meat. They're extraordinarily dangerous, capable of costing hunters their lives in a single encounter. And on top of all of that, humans spent thousands of years transforming them into gods, kings, and cultural symbols rather than meals. Any single one of these reasons alone might not have been enough to stop us, but stacked together, they formed something close to an impenetrable wall. Nobody ever formally voted on this or wrote it into law. Humans simply noticed the same pattern repeating itself independently in nearly every corner of the world. Some animals you eat and some animals you quietly, instinctively decide not to without ever fully articulating exactly why out loud. The elephant was never really on the menu, and now you understand precisely why.